This week on the BackTable podcast.
One of the things I want to get back to is the concept that physicians are executives already. So like anything that I get offered at this level after an MBA or Roger gets offered at this level, it's always going to be like at or near the C-suite. And what that means is that I need to understand financial statements or like financial Excel spreadsheets. I do not need to create them, right? And so I think we get flummoxed about like not having business knowledge, but like the business knowledge that we really need to understand is like, how is the sausage made? And then we take our skills of, particularly as an IR, being operations, efficiency, all of this stuff. It's really about like, how are you going to build this out? So I feel like that we feel like we're handicapped, but we're not as handicapped as we think.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BackTable podcast, your source for all things interventional and endovascular. You can find all previous episodes of our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and on BackTable.com. First, a brief message from our sponsor. All right, BackTable listeners, our next partner has a product that I use literally every day. I started using AG1 because my trainer uses it, and I asked him why, and he said, well, I feel like I get faster recovery and I sleep better at night. And so I learned more about it, and I actually got some free samples, and I started taking it. And then I told Mike and Sabine about it. What do you guys think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I started taking AG1 because my brother-in-law, he was actually taking it for the past year, and he kept on telling me how awesome it is. And then you asked me if I wanted to try it, Aaron, and I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to, I don't
get some free samples, right?
Exactly, get some free samples. I don't have time in the morning to eat breakfast or anything, so I was like, this would be perfect. Let me give it a shot.
So I started taking it because I am susceptible to peer pressure, and you guys did it, and also because I got free samples. But the free samples was a big part of that for me.
Yeah, and so you're taking a supplement. You kind of want to ask, okay, what's in this stuff? Well, with one scoop of AG1, you're actually absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens. What exactly are adaptogens, Michael Brazza? Do you know?
I think they come from space.
That sounds about right.
The ADAPT technique. You suck the clot.
That's right. They suck out the toxins.
Yeah,
like you're doing a thrombectomy. It's a suck out thing. That's science.
It's green. It's literally green. I feel healthy drinking it because it's green. And anything I see when they say superfoods or the smoothies there's like super greens. I mean, this thing is green. And it actually, to me, I like the taste. So
it's green, but when you shake it up, it starts to turn kind of white a little bit. And I think that's the adaptogens that are alive in there and that are working. And look, man, if it's in my head, it's working.
That's right. And it does support mental clarity and alertness. And your subscription comes with a year's supply of vitamin D, which is very important for us radiologists. I know mine was like critically low, my vitamin D level when I checked it. So that helps. And it comes in this little dropper. I just drop, one little drop in my Topo Chico every day, and I know I get my vitamin D. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/BackTableVI, as in vascular and interventional. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/BackTableVI to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Now, back to the episode. This is Aaron Fritts as your host. Today we have a very special episode on talking about getting an MBA as a physician with special guests, Dr. Aneesa Majid and Dr. Roger Tomihama. Welcome, guys. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having us. Appreciate this.
Yeah.
So this is a topic I've been wanting to cover for a while now, as I've contemplated pursuing an MBA myself for a few years. I've heard mixed things from, I was just having a conversation about this the other day with my financial advisor. And so I think it depends on who you talk to. And like we were talking about just now is, I think the answer to a lot of these questions is that it depends. But I do want to get to your guys' experiences, including how you researched the MBA, Roger, and then Aneesa, having been through it, sort of, where you found the key benefits were on the other side. So first, let's start with introductions. I'm going to ask you guys where you're at, practice type, and then you can just briefly tell us like where you're doing your MBA or where you got your MBA. Aneesa, let's start with you.
Sure. So I'm working with VIR Chicago. I
Nice.
of unofficially do locums, but I'm kind of with them, helping them out full time, doing IR. And so I'm based out of Chicago, and that's where I do my clinical practice. I also, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but as Aaron knows, I'm kind of on the entrepreneurial track, whether I wanted to be or not. And so I'm the CEO of Zipdata, which is a digital tech company working to get rid of fax machines in healthcare. And I did my MBA at Kellogg and finished in 2017.
Very cool. And Aneesa, you and I met here in Dallas when you were practicing here in Dallas.
Yes.
A number of years ago. And we've kept in touch over the years. And I think that was when you were traveling back and forth. And we'll talk a little bit about that, how you did your MBA. But that was right. You were traveling back and forth to Chicago, right? When you finished
to do my MBA at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Roger, tell us where you're at and how you're pursuing your MBA currently.
Yeah. My name is Dr. Roger Tomihama, and I'm an associate professor of interventional radiology at Loma Linda University School of Medicine. Little background on me, born and raised in Hawaii. So left Hawaii, I did my med school there, left there in 2003, did my residency at Yale Navy Hospital from 2003 to 2007, and then IR fellowship at the Brigham Women's Hospital subsequently. I've been in practice about 18 plus years. Initially getting out of residency, I was in the Navy as a Navy doc. I did radiology at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and then bounced around from in private practice for a couple years. My wife was a vascular surgeon, so essentially I was following her wherever she went for training. And then, was in private practice academics, and I've been in Loma Linda since 2016. Yeah. As for my MBA, I'm just starting the whole process. Unlike Aneesa, I've just started my first week at Wharton for the MBA program for executives at the University of Pennsylvania. So kind of brand new to the whole system, but yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about how that works logistically with you being a physician full time and then trying to do that out of Wharton, obviously being out of Philly.
Yeah.
Real curious, is your wife, so she's a practicing vascular surgeon?
Yep. Yeah. She's a vascular surgeon. She's at the VA here in Loma Linda. She's in academics. It's weird.
Yeah.
Like most people, I'm like the one person I have to follow my wife where she goes. Like she dictates.
I'm the same way.
Yeah, I was like, what? We're moving from Santa Monica to Loma Linda? Okay. It's like, yeah, but yeah.
That's not a bad thing.
No. No, I feel you though. I followed my wife's ENT career too.
Is that right? Okay, yeah.
But all right, well, great. And so Aneesa, I want to start with you since you received your MBA a few years ago. Tell us what led you to want to pursue it. And how did you go about searching and deciding on the program and any mentors? Did any mentors help you with the decision?
Yeah. So I'm going to tell the story which is I think things happen in 7-year intervals. That's kind of the cadence of life. And so I finished in 2003 training and, I'll just say my age. I was 32 at the time. And when you're in the startup world, everything is 5-year plans. Like everything goes on a 5-year plan. And that's kind of what was explained to me from my mentors in fellowship, which was, hey, listen, it takes a year for everybody to get to know you. And then the second year, everybody's comfortable and you're comfortable. And then the third year, you're starting to run. And 4 and 5, you're like established, right? So when you kind of get to established in your group or your practice at 5 years, when you get to 7 years, you kind of look up and start looking around and being like, so is this it? Is it this practice? Is it leadership here? Is there something else? I think that's just normal life for everybody, whatever we'll put it in the context of a practice, but I think that happens in industry all the way across the board as people are constantly looking to grow. Yeah. So around that time, Obamacare came out or was being talked about or all of that stuff. And the more I heard about it, the more I read about it, I was like, what is it that's going to be required to navigate this next stage? As I'm going into practice or leadership of practice or running groups or what I just felt like there was going to need to be more. And the way it was being talked about was like, do I need a law degree to be able to understand how to practice medicine? And that kind of started the search of, I just kind of felt like I wasn't quite sure how I was going to navigate medicine with a lot of things that were coming down the pipe. And so that's when I started thinking about, what do I need to do to like be successful in medicine? And it was several years later before I actually pulled the trigger on it. So I think most professionals and physicians think about this for a much longer time because there's never a good time to do it, you know?
Yeah.
And so as I kind of went through the search, it was like, well, you know, do you need a law degree? Laws always interest me. How would that work? And then I was like, no, that's just silly. And then, but then, you know, some of my peers who were in academics got Masters of Healthcare Administration, or I was the chairman when I was in the group before MTVIR, and I was invited to go and participate at the Harvard School of Public Health for their chiefs of departments program for 2 weeks.
Right.
And so when I was there, it was very much about leadership and how do you run departments and all this stuff. And it was all academics. I was the only person from private practice. But I was like, well, why would you, obviously they're promoting their programs. And I was like, well, what is a Master's of Public Health? Like, I don't think I ever really explored any of these other degrees,
Right.
I knew that they were out there, but I was so focused on being a doctor and like just getting through residency that I was like, well, I don't know about these other degrees, but like, what does public health do for you? Like, is that really something to pursue? And, ultimately I was like, well, I don't want to be an administrator and I don't want to be a public policy. I'm not a policy person. Like, I understand that it's important, but I'm not the person who's going to grill down into those details and stuff. And so it kept coming back to the MBA, and I actually did the ACR Radiology Leadership Institute when they first came out, and they were both held at Kellogg the first 2 years.
Oh.
And I got a sense from those 4 days of what it's like to be in a professional school, like how the teaching is different, how if you go for executive education, you're getting full professors. And I was engaged, in those 4 days each time with these topics, just fully. Which I don't think any of us are fully when we go to conferences. I mean, you're kind of sitting, you're sitting in the back and all this stuff.
You're on your phone.
I'm from Chicago. And so I remember finishing like the second week and saying to my family, I was like, I think I need to get an MBA. And to me, the MBA was, of all the degrees that were out there, the most versatile.
Mm-hmm.
Right, in terms of like a law degree. Like a lot of people get law degrees and they don't practice and they go into other things, but they have that degree. And for me, two things I knew. I knew that I wanted to be involved in leadership, and that like leadership was my passion after doing those two things, because I think leadership is how you set culture, and that's how you build good businesses. And then you needed to kind of have the business sense. And so when I finally pulled the trigger on it, I was 45. And we had just started MTVIR. And so here I was 9 months into starting a practice from scratch. I felt like I was running by the seat of my pants, trying to, based on what I had observed, do what I thought was better, but really not, just really like, I don't know what's going on. And then I also feel like medicine is changing every second. Yeah. And I didn't have anybody to really mentor me on the business side of like, are we doing this right? Is there a better way? Can we be more efficient? I think that's how IRs think. Like, we're very operational, and how are we efficient and stuff like that. And so what made me pull the trigger then were three things. One, I had started this practice and I felt like I needed help, just mentoring. I needed a place to go and ask questions. And two, we were just in the beginning parts of Zipdata, at that time of ZipRad, and Texas isn't really known for its entrepreneurial world. It's getting better, but you need networks to build a startup. And I felt like going and getting an MBA, you get a network of different people that could help with that. And three, probably, I mean, I hate this question. I wasn't asked it too many times in my life, but that question of like, where will you be in 5 years? Or will you be in 10 years? And for the first time in my life, I was asked that question about like, where would you be in 10 years? And I was like, not doing this.
Yeah.
And so then the question is, if you're not doing this, what is it that you will do?
Right.
Where will you go? How do you get there? And so to me, the MBA or any professional degree, if you kind of know, like you're a policy person or administration or whatever, is something that allows doors to open that you don't know exist, that can help you get to what is your next step. And again, I pulled the trigger at 45. And so the other thing I would say is that careers have halftime. Like even though we live in this society that's like fast, 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 and who's going to get to their billion as fast as possible and all these things, and some 29-year-old is on Instagram and they're making $5 billion. That's not like reality, right? The reality is most people have to go through and they learn and they become experts in their fields and stuff. And then they get to the top of their game of whatever their game is. And they're like, halftime, what's my next phase?
Yeah. And it sounds like, I mean, because you were chairman of the radiology department at Methodist, right? So you had reached that goal. That was like the pinnacle, right? And then you went off and started your own practice, which again, not like very few people were doing at that time. So very entrepreneurial, you were kind of, trailblazers in that sense here in Dallas. Created 100% IR practice, right? Also something that, this was what, 10 years ago, 9 years ago?
This was, we started in 2014.
Yeah. So again, before everybody else is creating OBLs now, but back then you guys were really kind of cutting edge doing that. And so I could see how you were constantly thinking about what's the next thing? What do I want to do that's going to allow me to evolve, not only in as a physician, but you had this entrepreneurial spirit that you wanted to continue to feed,
and
right?
To be honest with you, like I think a lot of entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs out of situation, not necessarily because they're like crazy and they're going to say, I'm going to stop this to go do that. Yeah. And so, if you're going to start a practice, that is 100% entrepreneurship. You are starting from zero, you are starting from an idea, a vision, and you're going to go and build it. And we had some idea of what a practice involved, like who we needed to help and insurance and all this stuff. But really, you're really like, most of us join practices and there's this black hole where other people handle that, right? Yeah. And when you are going to like take on that responsibility, now we talk about it in terms of the OBL, it doesn't really matter. That is a huge steep learning curve of not only like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to hire people? How are we going to keep them? Because every time you lose a person, that's costly. You waste time, you lose and all that stuff. And so I know everybody looks at me like an entrepreneurial spirit. I feel like I do things out of need. And I think that that's something that IRs really very much relate to, that they adapt and they're always kind of thinking at the next step. And you're always thinking like, when you go and plan a case, you're like, you're thinking it all the way through. So you're like 3 steps forward for what you're going to ask your tech for.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I love that background. Thank you for giving us that and telling us, the main reasons that you decided to pursue the MBA. Roger, we're going to jump to you with a similar question. Tell us, you're currently starting your program. How did you research and decide on this program, and any advice on how to choose?
Yeah. I started with no knowledge. It's like zero. Like I didn't know where to begin. I felt lost. Three sources were really helpful for me is like, first, just people I know who had MDs and MBAs. That's one. The second was general MBAs. And third was just the internet, like websites and YouTube. So the first thing I did was I tried to find all the people like Aneesa, like how I knew, like one of my former attendings is Howie Foreman. He's like a MBA at Yale School of Management. And so I called him up first, like, hey, I'm thinking of getting an MBA, this is what I think I want to do. What do you think? And where to start? I talked to a couple of them, my class friends that I knew from residency or from practice. One guy was a urologist, ended up leaving urology, went to MIT to get his MBA. He's now in like a medical startup for drug development. Another person was a radiation oncologist. I knew she was from Penn, but then now is here in California, went to Wharton and got her executive MBA. And she's like in the R&D space for drug development, medical device development for cancer research. And I have another friend who who went to UCLA for his MBA after being an internal medicine guy for a number of years. And he was in. So basically, I call all these guys first, ask them like, hey, why'd you choose your program? What did you look? Did you have a specific goal in mind? And they were really helpful and really, giving me their rationale, and it really, opened up an idea of like what to expect. The second group of people I talked to was that I didn't think would be helpful, but who actually was like the general MBA folks. Like, most of these guys are, went to the full-time program or part-time program, and, they may not have specific information about how an MBA will help a doctor. But what I really found helpful was their understanding of the culture of business school, the culture of business industries in general, and how it operates. Because, we in medicine, we know the culture, like, there's residents and med students, attendings and techs and nurses, and the insider workings. But yeah, like to me, like the whole business thing was like a big black box. Like I know that somebody makes money, somebody loses money, somebody, whatever. And so you don't really know the operations and how like the culture works. And so I thought they were really helpful. They told me, like, I had guys who went to business school, and they said, okay, yeah, this is what they're looking for. This is what kind of you expect. The whole networking thing. I was like, okay, what does that mean? What does the network mean? And that's sort of helpful. And the third thing I just used to get information was I deep dived the whole internet on this whole process. Like I went to every single website I found. Like I found that like the GMAT Club website, Poets and Quants, are these, MBA school specific websites, very helpful. Soup to nuts information on everything you need to know about like admissions, test prep, experiences. They talk about rankings, profiles, articles. They had everything and that was a great starting point. And then I also went to the program specific websites. So any program that I was looking at, like I went to every single program, and, they had great information on there that I wouldn't have expected. I thought it was all going to be just like a little, hey, blurb about these are our faculty, this is how much they're renowned for, blah, blah, blah. But there was a lot of stuff on like testimonials from like current students, old students, and really helpful, just getting a little glimpse of what to expect. And so that's
Quick
how
question.
I started.
Do you, as a physician, do you feel, and this kind of goes for both of you guys, do you feel like we have an advantage in terms of getting into like a top tier program? Or is it you're just the same as anybody else? What your GMAT score, and like, I mean, do you think physicians have an advantage in getting into a better program, basically?
This is my opinion. I think yes, only because, we're underrepresented. And so this goes back to the culture. Like I learned that, like if you're a software engineer from India in like your late 20s, that's like a huge demographic apparently of representative of people. And so for those cohorts, you have to be like at much higher.
They're looking for
score.
Diversity in terms
of and so
demographics.
Exactly. So, I think medicine, like for the doctors, I think it's usually like 5% of any MBA class. And so we're kind of underrepresented. And a good example is that like, a lot of top MBA programs might waive the GMAT requirement for MDs. Like so that's an indication, I think, that, hey, they want more of you guys to come here. And
they know you got to med school, you're smart enough.
I just have to say, like, the amount of research that Roger did is like 99% more than what I did. And that, I basically was like, once I realized that I was like, I need an MBA, or this is what's going to be right for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like desperate because we had MTVIR going, and I felt like, oh my God, what if we fail at this, blah, blah, blah. I was pretty much like, I'm from Chicago. I know what Kellogg's like. Kellogg's outstanding.
Amazing.
I'm going to go to Kellogg. I will say though, I did ask a lot of people who had done online MBAs versus in-person MBA. And there is a big difference with that. And there's a ton of ways of getting your MBA now. And to a person that I talked to about online MBAs, they said it was great. It probably took the same amount of time, but the relationships that you build in person that allow you to grow out after the MBA with your class and then also with your professors is so much richer to go in person.
So Roger, are you going back and forth, or are you doing mostly online?
Yeah, no, I'm going every twice a month. So at Wharton, they actually have two campuses. So they have their Philly campus, and then they have a San Francisco campus. And so I'm going to San Francisco two weekends a month.
That's
essentially.
nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So much closer.
And that's what it worked out for Kellogg. You go 2 weekends.
Yeah.
Well, they again, they have two campuses, and it's what I call the mothership in Chicago, and then they have their second campus in Miami. And so, like, from Dallas, it's just so much easier to go to Chicago, and I just wanted to go home.
Yeah.
Twice a month, and I absolutely would not trade it. I would also say that I could have made it easier on myself, right? I could have gone to SMU or UTD,
Right.
and made it easier on myself. And I think, there were a couple of things that kind of came into play, and one is I didn't know the answer to number 3, which was, if not this, then what? And some of my questions was like, would a higher tier school get me more options? I think that's yes. I did look at Wharton, California, but I wasn't going to take the GMAT because I suck at standardized tests and I always have, and it's amazing I'm a doctor because I barely made it through any of those. And I did it when you had to circle the pencils. So
Kellogg didn't make you take the GMAT. Oh, that's
and
awesome.
I have to take the GMAT. Yeah. And so, but whereas if I had applied to University of Chicago, it didn't matter. Like, everybody had to take it. So, so there are schools that don't require the GMAT, particularly for physicians. I would answer your question to say that physicians are looked at higher tier schools and all schools, because in my class of 70 or 80 people, there were 4 of us. It's very, very low in terms of the representation. And then I would also say, I'll tell you honestly, like, I talked to a lot of people, and one of the people I talked to was the head of a huge state oncology practice. And we were 9 months into MTVIR, and he had been a mentor, like, through some of it. And I talked to him. He's much older than me. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about getting an MBA. What do you think? And he's like, oh, you've already done it. I wouldn't do it. And I said, well, you got an MBA. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, well, why did you get an MBA? And he's like, well, I just felt like healthcare was changing really rapidly, and I felt like I needed a little bit more. And I was like, well, when did you get your MBA? And he's like, 2 years ago. And I said, but you've been doing this for 10 years. You've been doing it for 12 years now. You got 2 years ago. And I said, I just found that curious. And I was like, well, if this guy who's been running this multi-location, huge state oncology practice, after 10 years of running it, felt like he needed an MBA.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I probably need to worthwhile and do this. But my other thing was, my experiences as a minority female going through life, right? And so I think also you always have to kind of take your step up a little bit to compete. It's a very different experience to be underrepresented minority and underrepresented minority female versus being white male or white female in terms of, like, whatever halftime is. And, my halftime to the next phase includes, like, possibly sitting on a paid board position, possibly being involved with advisor on VC or PE firms, or who knows. And there's a lot of people who want to do that. And so how does my healthcare experience and my experience with my MBA help that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's something that through our whole discussion today really comes through. It's like, it depends. It's like, well, before you can decide MBA or not, like, what is it that you want to pursue, and will this help you get there?
Right. And what I want to actually dive into based off that, Aneesa, is there are different types of MBAs out there. And Roger, can you tell the audience and me as well, like, what are the different types of MBAs that are out there, and why did you choose the path you took?
Yeah, no, great question. Obviously, I had this exact same question, so I think the first step to look at, obviously, is to look at whether you want to do an sort of like this MD specific MBA versus a traditional MBA, EMBA program. So I think these MD specific programs, and there are only a handful of there, like at a different university. Like I think Brandeis has one, University of Tennessee. They're like these MD specific or MD exclusive MBA programs, and That's one way to go. The other way to go is your traditional, go to Kellogg, University of Chicago, Wharton, whatever. And, so the MD specific, I looked into it, and I think it's obviously they're all physicians. So, it's great, I think, for those individuals that are, I think, really interested in like maybe just advancing within healthcare management, be optimizing their practices, maybe healthcare policy, just truly refining the tools necessary to be a better executive MD, essentially. And I think it's probably a nice, like a hybrid between like an MBA and an MHA, as Aneesa had mentioned, really gonna give you specific tools that'll be really helpful for the future. As opposed, I think the traditional MBA programs are probably those best for those people like you guys, like you, who are, entrepreneurs, maybe interesting pivoting outside of clinical medicine, starting a company, working in biotech. I think the reason those would be helpful is because you have your network and alumni come from all industries at all levels and from all over the country. And so you just, you get this vast level of resources that you will never get anywhere else. And I think that's the first thing to look at, is whether you want MD specific versus traditional. The second thing to consider is the different types of programs. So as you guys mentioned, there's like the full-time program, which is the traditional, like in your 20s. There's a part-time program, there's an executive MBA program, and then there's the online. And each of these are actually quite different in what they may provide you and what you can get out of it. So I didn't know this. Like I thought, okay, MBA, yeah, part-time, full-time, probably all the same. But what I didn't realize is like the demographics is a big factor on like your network, and your cohort is quite different. So apparently the full-time program and the part-time programs are really composed of the individuals who were like, they're out of college, maybe 1 or 2 years, worked for a little while at some banking firm, and then getting their MBA and going to finance or something. So they're like in their 20s and 30s, usually like 3 to 5 years of work experience. And, usually looking as an MBA to springboard into another industry, like in venture capital or some really hardcore, real, like what I think of as business. The other side is this executive MBA where they're like an older cohort, sort of like, yeah, I'm 46, by the way, Aneesa. So I started just as like, I'm with you. I'm like too old for school. I'm like, different crowd. Yeah, this is like your 30s to 40s, mid to upper level management folks, usually established as families, and it's a different group. And when I was looking to applying, a good example is I was applying to use Berkeley, and like they had like the part-time and executive, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll do the part-time because it's fully online. I'm like, oh, that's great, like maybe I won't have to travel. But as I was speaking to the admissions people, they say, oh, well, you probably would be better in the executive program because you're a little older than all these folks, and so you won't have much to not relate, but I think you'll glean a lot more. And so I didn't even know that there was like a difference. And so it was really eye-opening to hear, the culture of what these programs are like.
Because it's like a lot of projects, right? Aren't you doing like a lot of group projects, Aneesa, and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, just to take off from where Roger left off. So my personal feeling is I outright say don't do the healthcare MBA. Because again, if you are mid-career and you're thinking about doing this, you want to get as much out of it that is going to help you. You want to squeeze everything out of this. You're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
However you're going to pay for it. Kellogg is not inexpensive, but
I don't think any of them are, right?
Yeah. You have to remember what you buy. I bought the Kellogg network which is, I can tell you, is outstanding as an alumni network. Wharton's not that much difference. And so you already know healthcare. You already know all of that. You already kind of are living it, breathing it, all that stuff. To sit in a room with other people who are in other industries that are executives. We're executives. We don't get treated like executives, but we are executives in our world. And that is where like you really kind of have to go, because they're all middle manager above. And the whole purpose that all those people from other industries are sitting there is for them to take another step up into either their organization or somewhere else. And that's no different than what a physician would be wanting to do. They're about to take another step somewhere. Maybe it's leadership in the hospital, their group, starting to practice, whatever. And to be able to sit in there and hear from other executives who have a culture problem, had a supply chain problem that maybe we have to navigate. Like we have to navigate a supply chain problem right now with contrast, right? All of these things, how they troubleshoot it, how they think about it, how they approach it, to get that and be able to bring it back into healthcare, in my opinion, is far more valuable. Even if your whole goal is to stay as a clinical doctor for the, with some side stuff to go forward, is so much more valuable than to sit with a bunch of other doctors or a bunch of other healthcare people who we all know the problem, where you can fall into a groupthink. Whereas when you go into the executive program, you get to learn so many other ways that are out there. And the other thing is that there are also some things that are adjuncts to MBA, right? So there's the American Association of Physician Leaders. You can go through AAPL and basically take a lot of their courses. It's less expensive and have get the business basis of it all and leadership training. And a lot of those people who have done it are administrators or practice managers or have moved on to insurance companies or healthcare. And so if that's really something that you want to do and kind of not want to have to put that money down, you can kind of do that and move forward. You can get business information from Coursera, for free as well. But you're not going to get the network and there's a lot to the projects. So what projects do, and Roger's just at the beginning of us. So I had a group that I just went through 2 years with together. And we had assignments that your assignments are all by group. And if you think about it, that's how life happens. Life happens in team play and group presentations, right? Like we work in teams all the time. It's really about teams. And so by doing these projects in groups, you develop leadership skills. You develop, I had somebody who was a vet. I had somebody from real estate. I had somebody who worked in cybersecurity. I had somebody who was an actuarial. Then there was me. And we had to divide up and write papers, write memos. Who's going to be the writer? Who's going to be the editor? Who's going to do all these calculations? Who's going to, I'm not the Excel expert math person.
Right.
Like that's
Everybody's
not me. That's
strong
not my
points.
strengths, but there were other people. And how do we put that and put the best foot forward? And you take those skills and maybe we should have them, but you take those skills back and you apply them into your day-to-day life and you start making your life more efficient.
Yeah.
So that's really, it's the cohorts of it all. But, I would not, as painful as it was to at that particular time, because we were traveling, not just Dallas, but, our group covered Midland, Texas, and then to fly to Chicago. I loved every weekend away because I got to be away from healthcare. Nobody bothered me for that week. I just got to absorb knowledge. And again, anybody who's looking at this, you're mid-career, Roger's mid-career, maybe going from early to mid-career, you're really looking at halftime, right? You're looking at what's going to be the next step. And halftime doesn't mean you have to leave clinical practice. It doesn't mean you have to leave healthcare. It's when you start looking at halftime, there's actually a book called Halftime that you can get that talks about this. It's about saying, I've gotten to this level of expertise. How do I craft my life now?
Yeah.
Instead of me being told I have to do residency and then fellowship and get a job, and then I have these things, and then I get to be a partner, and then where things are kind of told to you and you're kind of going through this program, how do I get to take all this and craft my life to the things that I'm more passionate about? For me, it was leadership. And that's the other thing I think people don't realize is that everybody thinks it's all business, but it's really about, but I'll make I will say this because it was said to me the first day, and this is how I knew. I only applied to Kellogg. I had done those things. I was going back to Chicago. I didn't look at any of this stuff. I didn't research faculty. I probably should have. I just didn't. I was just like, it's Kellogg. But the first day that I was there, and I'm sorry, Roger, but this is, business schools, they brag amongst each other. But anyway, the first day I was there, the purpose of Kellogg their mission is to educate, equip, and inspire the next generation of leaders. And, our dean sat there the first day and said, hey, listen, if you're here because you want to figure out how to make the most money, go to Wharton or University of Chicago.
Mm.
You will make money.
Yeah.
They're like, you are physicians and doctors and your middle management, your executives, you're going to make money. We are about who's going to lead the future.
Yeah. I like that though. I like that philosophy.
Yeah. So for me, that was value alignment. And I think that a lot of people, when you start looking at halftime and what is my next step and is a formal degree next step, it's about, well, where do I want to go? And are my values aligned with that? Or are my values not aligned with how things are happening here? And how do I make that transition to something else where everything kind of falls in line and my values and my passion fall together?
Yeah. So I guess that raises the question of like, how do you get a sense of the culture of an MBA program, ahead of time? And Roger, I know you were searching online and asking people.
Yeah.
And Aneesa, you kind of just made a move based off of like, the reputation and the location. It turned out to be a good fit.
The best thing I heard was one of my classmates called all the alumni networks of the schools he was interested in.
Okay.
And this is going to be another plug for Kellogg. I'm shameless when it comes to Kellogg. But anyway, it's a marketing branding school. What can I tell you? But he called all the alumni networks to find out what it was like to go to, and that's the best. I think that's the best. People ask me about Kellogg all the time. A couple of docs I know have gone to Wharton. They've done either the Philadelphia or the California campus. And for docs, I think that's where most people end up is at Wharton or Kellogg or, University of Chicago or something like close by. But at the top tier stuff, you can't do Harvard unless you want to give up 2 years because they don't have any sort of executive program. But I think calling and talking to the alumni network. And so he lived in California. He flew out to Kellogg. And I was like, well, what? You could have gone to Wharton. You could have gone to Wharton in San Francisco. It would have been so much simpler. And he's like, I called all the alumni networks and the only school where every single alumni that I reached out to called, set up a phone call or whatever was Kellogg. And they told me the most about the school. But I think that that's probably the best way to get your handle on culture. I think Roger will tell you, like, you don't really know till you get there, like what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
And it's like drinking out of a fire hose for a little bit until you get your bearings on it with the travel and kind of the amount of work. It's about 10 hours of work a week because you have to do your work. Everybody's got to read the cases. Everybody's got to do, a little bit. And then it's like, who's writing, who's doing the math, who's, all this. And then you have a couple of team discussions. So it's not like it's not burdensome to do it, but it's still, it's drinking from the fire hose right when you get started.
So I want to talk a little bit about time and monetary commitment. So Aneesa, yours was a 2-year program?
18 months. Yeah.
18 months. Okay. And then Roger, how long's your program?
Yeah, it's full 24 months. Yeah. They stretch it out.
Okay. But it's 2 weekends a month during that whole period.
Yeah. So there's different formats like that Aneesa will kind of attest to. Like there's, like the time commitment is varied based on different schools have different programs. So actually a great example when I looked into Kellogg's program is they have the Evanston campus does 2 weekends a month, but the Miami campus does 1 week a month. Like they'll do longer. So, and, different programs have like a different structure set up. So Berkeley was once a month. Chicago, Wharton, some of the other programs twice a month. So it's I can only attest to just starting and about the time commitment. And I think Aneesa is probably right. At least 20 hours a week. Like I hadn't even started yet, and I had like pre-reading assignments. Like I was drowning. Like it was like I would say 2 weeks to prepare for like 3 classes, and we had, for just a good example, so the Wharton program they kind of pride themselves of having an exact same experience as a full-time MBA. Like we actually had the same classes, same requirements, same test structure as a full-time MBA, but we're doing it on 2 days a month. I mean, this is ridiculous. And so after 1 week at Penn, like for the first week, I go back and have a midterm for accounting. And I'm like, I have never seen an accounting class in my life. And now I have a midterm after 5 days of classes. I'm like, it's like
super accelerated, it sounds like.
What it makes you do is learn time management better than you ever thought.
Yeah.
Because people are married, People have kids. People leave their wives or partners behind for a weekend with their kids and who knows how many soccer games or birthday parties and all that stuff. And they balance it. And I'll tell you, there's no right time to do it.
Yeah.
You just have to, at some point, say, this is when
Pull
you're
the
going to have to
trigger.
pull the trigger. But when you're done, you have all this time and you manage time even better, that you can kind of do more things. I will say that it also depends on how you learn. So for me to only do 1 weekend a month, I will have forgotten everything from those lectures, been like totally overwhelmed, have so much in front of you for the next weekend where there might be a test or there might be something due. Whereas like 2 weeks, every 2 weeks kind of kept me pretty honest to do it, but also kept the learning pretty consistent because your everyday life can interfere, so quickly to be able to give your attention. And then in cost is going to be one of the things that like could be a deterrent, right? Because it really depends on, it's one thing is time, but other thing is cost. A lot of people are coming out, they're still paying student loans and stuff. So, Kellogg's a heavy cost. Kellogg's like $200K and Wharton's not that much different. But, if you're local and you go to SMU or UTD, they're both reputable. And I think it's also a question of like for law schools, like if you want to practice in that state, they say go to a law school in that state. It's very, very specific. And I think it's really like, well, hey, I know I'm never going to leave Colorado. So maybe University of Colorado is fine.
Right.
Then, because you're never going to leave Colorado. You're going to get what you want out of it. They're going to have a network and all that stuff. But if you think I want to open as many doors as possible, well, then you're going to climb the tiers a little bit. And then that cost is going to kind of be there. And then, of course, you can also see about taking some, I don't know how much executive MBAs do this, but there are courses to take like the AAPL or other like kind of, certificates and stuff that you could possibly present to like possibly get credit. But most of the top tier schools, they want you to feel like you had the rigor of an MBA school. So Kellogg is no different. And I think just like Wharton, Roger, correct me if I'm wrong, but Kellogg starts September or January. And there are there's 2 cohorts, Evanston, Miami, and there's in each time. So in a year, 4 cohorts are going all the way through. And then and they overlap. Some of those overlap. So we worked with the Miami campus. Electives is something that we didn't really get to talk about so far, but like some of the cool things about electives for these higher tier schools is they're international schools. So you have international electives. So I went to Hong Kong for a week. We
awesome.
went to Canada. We have Israel. You get to talk about businesses, Germany, all that stuff. And I think that's another attraction to Kellogg is it's a global school. So there's Global Network Week. So all the international people come to Evanston campus for 3 weeks over August. And then all the U.S. students will do at least one international elective.
Yeah, there's so much here. And as we're coming up on the hour, what I want to do is, and Roger, I think it would honestly, so I want to give Roger a chance to plug his YouTube channel because he's doing these tutorials as he goes through the process. But Roger, it sounds like Aneesa would be a great guest on one of your YouTube shows.
Yes.
Just to help kind of run through, the process itself and like some of these advantages.
Definitely.
Please tell the audience, Roger, a little bit about like why you started the channel and what your plan is for it as you go through the process of getting an MBA.
I think probably, as with maybe how similar to the way you started BackTable, I felt there's so much great information out there that we just don't have access to because they're kind of anecdotal and there's no books about it and so I just as I was prepping this process last year, I spent hundreds of hours just like talking to people, researching websites and looking at videos. And I just felt like there's got to be a better way. Like I want to save the next generation of classes, I have MDs like, hey, you don't have to do what I did. I'm going to save you all this. I'm going to condense it down to the high yield points, like first aid for getting into MBA program. That was the goal.
Yeah.
And so, I just wanted to make sure it's simplified for the next generation of folks so they don't have to do what I did. Yeah, I essentially I created a series of like, right now I'm at 6 videos or something like that, where it was just like, the basics on like, okay, first episode 1 was like how to get started. Like, okay, this is what I did. This is what you can look for. This is and then second video was like, okay, these are the factors that a doctor should consider in choosing an executive MBA program, pros and cons of these different factors, the types of programs, the schedules, the locations, just like Aneesa. I did it all, and I figured I'm gonna give it to somebody, spoon feed it on a silver platter, so they don't have to do it. And third episode was like the steps to applying what you need to do, with the requirements, the timeframes, all the cultural stuff about the MBA admissions process, which is like just like the med school admissions process, right? We all learned in college, you got to volunteer, you got to take your MCAT by your 3rd year, you got to do something, and same thing. I just wanted to make sure it's simplified. And so that's all. I wanted to make it simplified for the next generation. I had really no plans to like become like, I just wanted to get it out there for people.
Yeah,
that's all.
Yeah. No, we appreciate that. And I've enjoyed the videos, and thank you for putting those out there, and looking forward to watching the process and live vicariously through you going through this MBA program. I just have a final question for you guys, and then I'll leave it to you for any final thoughts. But and Roger and I talked about this previously, is as a physician and, I guess physician entrepreneur, and having had some ventures in both in practice as well as with BackTable, I feel like this constant chronic insecurity of not really knowing much about business, right? We get zero training in business in medical school. I was talking to some dentists the other day, and they just seem so much more business savvy. And I feel like it's part of their training because they're more likely to go out and start their own practice, right? But for physicians, we're almost like set up to just become employees. And how can we curtail that without feeling this need to get an MBA? Should business be part of the medical school curriculum? I think so. But at the same time, if you're truly want to be a physician executive, physician entrepreneur, it sounds like from what you guys are telling me, an MBA is the best way to go, despite the time and monetary commitment. And there's no real good time, right? But Aneesa, I want to know, like, what are your thoughts on, just overall business knowledge amongst physicians, and what we can do if somebody doesn't have the time or money to pursue an MBA? What are some other avenues we can take?
So one of the things I want to get back to is the concept that physicians are executives already, because we feel like we've been beat down, but you are executives already. And at that level, like anything that I get offered at this level after an MBA, or Roger gets offered at this level, it's always going to be like at or near the C-suite. And what that means is that I need to understand financial statements or like financial Excel spreadsheets. I do not need to create them.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think we get flummoxed about like not having business knowledge, but like the business knowledge that we really need to understand is like, how is the sausage made? So we know like what's the input in, what's the input out, how that goes. And then we take our skills of, particularly as an IR, being operations, efficiency, all of this stuff. Every single minute of the day is a cost.
Yeah.
That's what it really comes down to, and understanding that. And there are ways to do that without getting an MBA in terms of, like I said, Coursera, which is Coursera. They have a ton of basic and just free courses all throughout the world that you can go and get a taste for it.
Right.
There's the American Association of Physician Leaders, of which, after I got my MBA, I could just sit for their capstone, and you have that for leadership stuff, which allows you to spend much less and get like that business basis. But ultimately, it's really about developing into like, okay, what do you know and what don't you know? Like I am not going to be a CTO, but I run a tech company, so it's really about like, how are you going to build this out? You're doing it with BackTable. Like, what do you know and what don't you know? And how do you get the people to help you with that? But if you're putting people in place, whether it's in your practice, your OBL and all this stuff, you still need to have a general idea of what they're doing as they oversee it and they present you things.
Right.
So I feel like that we feel like we're handicapped, but we're not as handicapped as we think.
Yeah.
And when we're really talking about business, yes, there's the dollars and cents of it all, You have to understand how the sausage is made, and you need to understand CPT codes and all this stuff in terms of like RVUs and how payment has happened. But really, it's about the next stage, which is the other things, negotiation, understanding, operations, understanding how all of that comes back into the dollars and cents. And that's what I think in terms of business school, MBA does. But just to back it up, if you're thinking about an additional degree, figure out your passion first. It's not, it may not be, oh, every doctor gets an MBA. Like you need to be specific about your next halftime, about that. And it might be that like, hey, listen, I can't stand the gun massacres. I am going to go into policy.
Yeah.
Right. That's a whole different deal,
right?
In terms of healthcare policy and stuff. So that's what I would say. And I would say that having done an MBA, what it allowed me to do was to articulate better what are my strengths, which we don't really have the language around. Like, I think everybody who's an IR is good at operations because they know how to make that efficient. Well, that's not something that I could, that I could really had the words to articulate that. Like, some of my strengths are strategy, operations, marketing, and branding, and growth.
Right.
And understanding, well, what does it mean to be growth mindset versus, not, And I think that it gives us a language that allows us to then interact better with the people who do play with the money, wherever that is. Yeah. But also in terms of if you want to start a practice, understanding how that financing goes and all that stuff, it makes it a little bit easier. But I don't think we're in as detrimental a position as possible. But yes, I agree. There should be some basic business understanding, at least if not in medical school, I think more in the last couple years of residency in anticipation to interview and apply for jobs of what to look for.
Yeah. Roger, any final words before we wrap this up?
Actually, if we have time, I wanted to ask a question for both of you guys.
Yeah.
So let's start with Aaron. I mean, just for me, I know that you started BackTable and it's just this amazing visual growth of like what you guys accomplished. I'm curious, like, what's your, I mean, I know you're thinking of the MBA. I'm sure it's related to the BackTable and the development, but like, what is your end goal? I'm curious. Are you thinking of selling or just growing it to a certain thing, or you have any, selling it out to another company, or what's your end game with BackTable?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, I think for now we're just grow, in an organic sort of natural way. Like I was just telling you, we're starting an OBGYN show. Well, that opportunity, like I was in a different direction. I was thinking ophthalmology or spine, but we didn't really have a good fit for, a host or content team for those shows. So even though we wanted to do that, it just wasn't there. The opportunity wasn't there. And then here comes an opportunity with OBGYN with just the right people. And so that's the way each show has developed beyond just our vascular interventional show. And so it's not, so like we want to grow in terms of specialty side, specialties and size and bringing on more hosts, but also just evolve the content itself, right? So, from episode 1 to 50 to 100 to 200, the sound quality is better. The content I feel like is getting better. Our hosting skills, our interviews, like I feel like we continue to evolve in terms of delivery and distribution. So and I was telling you this, Roger, earlier, is helping people find the information they want when they need it, right?
Yeah.
Because even like Google search now, if you type something in, like the whole first page is patient-directed content. How does a physician find what they're looking for unless they know the specifics of like a paper? You can go on PubMed, but if you want to know how do I build a kyphoplasty practice, how are you going to find that information?
All that anecdotal information. I'm the same way. And that's the whole reason I started this. It's just like, I want to save people the problems of like trying to find information, which is an ocean of, Can I ask you one more question for Aneesa? If that's
for sure.
So my question, Aneesa, is like, so if you pivot from clinical medicine, especially from clinical IR, and you go into admin or you run your tech company, are you trapped like from coming back? Because I feel like I worry that like, and I've seen this happen with a couple of people, like and they were in administration. Like, I knew a guy who was in the Navy. He was an admiral. He was a radiologist by training, but did 20 years of administration, came back to clinical radiology and was rusty. But he got it back eventually. But IR is even more dynamic than that, where we're constantly changing. And, is it possible to get back to clinical medicine? Suppose I go and pivot to industry and, don't practice.
I think this is where the entrepreneur side has to come out, and time management from MBA. But, it's one of the reasons why I went the locums route, right? Because you keep your hands in clinical medicine, but you don't hurt a group by being part of their group and not being able to meet the expectations of, being a partner and all this stuff, having done that. But you have to make a decision about your passion for clinical medicine and where that's going to go. I think a lot of people start thinking about extra degrees and, I could go and do this or go and do that. And how great is that? They work for a biotech company and all of that stuff. But, we all got into this to be practicing doctors. And those skills are very hard won, fine-tuned, the more you do it skills. And personally, I feel like the more you want to go into leadership or these other things, the more you still are in the trenches and can understand what's going on the day-to-day for it. That still helps you. Even if you back your schedule up to 2 days a week, 1 week a month, something like that. My advice is not to ever fully leave clinical until you're really ready to do that.
Makes sense.
And to start to balance the other opportunities and passions that come to you with your clinical time. Maybe that's 2 weeks a month clinical, and then you have 2 weeks to do all of this other stuff. Or, for me, the time management skills that I got out of doing the MBA, I do a lot of things through my day, even in between cases or all of that stuff. It's not the best. I'd like to just one day sit down and just do CEO stuff for my tech company, or just do the fundraising, or just do the sales pitches. But, you have to kind of go for it. But I'm not to the point where I feel like, particularly for IR, that if you give that up, you'll get your skills back. But there is something to the fact that we do it every day and how fine-tuned we are. And, you're 18 years out. I'm more than that. And you're just better. Right? You're just better and faster. And that also allows you to kind of balance it. So the clinical question, and also, there is this idea out there that like you get the MBA and then you leave clinical practice. It's like you've gone to the dark side, or you're a suit now, or you're whatever. And I think there's gravitas amongst our colleagues that if you're still dealing with the pains of an EHR and dealing with the, inefficiencies of a system of operational systems and stuff, that you can bring your MBA into helping that situation and not hurting it.
Yeah, I think that's solid advice, Aneesa, because I cut back to 1 week a month, Roger. I just cover my local group. Yeah, I'm locums. I just cover them 1 week a month, no call, no nights, no weekends. It's pretty amazing. And I can just focus on BackTable, but I still feel like I got 1 foot in, and it helps spur ideas. It helps continue to, network. And then I can actually have a conversation clinically about something. I don't feel totally out of the loop. I've gone back and forth. I think at most I might take 6 months off if I want to focus on something, but because I did take a break from hospital medicine for a couple years where I hadn't done any hospital cases, thrombectomies or nothing that was, it was all outpatient stuff. So it was all pretty basic. And when I came back to the hospital, I was very nervous about that, but it did come back to me pretty quick.
Back to, okay, that's good to know.
Plus you have partners, right? You have people that you can reach out to. You have helplines. So I think, once and I definitely felt more comfortable, being 7-8 years out in practice versus, I don't know if I could have done that 2 or 3 years out.
Yeah.
Right.
So you had a good foundation. Yeah, and it was just getting used to the devices and anything that you had to, whatever. Okay, that's good.
Right.
That's good to know.
Think about how we're always learning new devices, right? And some people are always learning new procedures. So you have the foundation, and you got to cut yourself some slack, right? You may not be perfect when you come back like you felt like you once were, but that's okay because you went and learned a new skill. You went and learned a new skill that other people didn't learn, and that's going to help you. What like Aneesa keeps saying over and over again is like, you got to follow your passion and what's next for your life, not worry about everybody else and what they're doing and what they might think of you either. That's the other big hurdle to get over is like Aneesa kind of just said is like, don't worry about what other people think. If you're confident that you can come back to clinical medicine after a year taking off and be just fine, I know you can. I'm sure you can. I'm sure most people can. If you're good before, you're gonna be good after. If you have the passion for it though, but don't go back to it if you're gonna do it half-assed, right? Because that was my whole thing. Is like I didn't want to go back and then I'm not really into it. So yeah, I think it's just you gotta kind of weigh it out.
Though, it's so funny. Like the reason I asked that is like, and when I was at Penn and we met a lot of people and we're talking about our experiences, and I was talking to some of my colleagues who are like in management in other industries that are a little more volatile. They had to lay off like 200 people, and I was like, whoa, that's crazy. Even like great people got laid off. And it was just one of those things that I always wondered if like transitioning to like the business side, how volatile even being a CMO of a startup would be, like, hey, we could be doing good and then, I'm sure we always have our skills to fall back on, but is it like hey, once you go too far, you're like beyond the edge of return, but I guess it doesn't sound like that would be the case. But
well, I mean, again, you'll learn this in negotiations, but right, like everything is negotiable. And one of the things that's negotiable is how much clinical time you still have.
Yeah.
Always for any position. But I mean, a CMO of a startup versus a CMO that's of a company that's 8 years out and gone through Series C, Series A, Series B are two different things overall as well. So, I would never say our company, all of the founders for Zipdata, we still have our day jobs. And we have built it and are bringing on our first small enterprise client. But you also have to, what you learn, just through the grind as Aaron has learned how to become this podcaster and stuff. What I've learned is that a digital health company, takes 8 years to go, and that's very different. You don't know that till you get into the grind of it all. But, some of that I learned by being an alumni and going back to alumni events at Kellogg and stuff, I still am learning from Kellogg. There's an elective, two of my favorite professors to an international elective, and it's in Portugal. I'm going to Portugal, like as an alumni,
awesome.
and I'm going to pick grapes and make wine. but it's going to be cool, and I'm going to meet a whole new set of alumni that come from a whole different world, and those are the connections that matter. And people have said your network is your net worth, and that's 100% true. Because it's always it's what we've always learned from before, but it is who and that comes as we get older through, shared passions, shared values, shared goals, and principles, all of that stuff where you get to do that. And, Wharton will offer that to you when as you go through it. It's going to be hard. It's like a league of your own. It's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't hard, everybody would do it.
Right.
So, but the clinical thing, I'd keep that in any way, shape, or form until you're really ready to say, I can live without doing it.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even if it's just diagnostic. I mean, even just your diagnostic skills, I mean, I have this VA gig where it's like, it's teleradiology. And as long as I do like 2 shifts a month, like I can hold on to that. Right. Exactly. So.
And that's a unique advantage of IR, right? Is to have that DR training that you can always, if you're injured, if you're whatever, life can change in a second, as we've discussed. And to be able to have that flexibility is something that's there. I mean, I could do DR again, I suppose, if I really was like forced to do it. It will come back. I would be very scared to do it myself because I've been in the 100% IR world for a long time. But that is something that for early and mid-career people to consider as they go through, because you just never know. A car accident happens, something happens where you can't wear the lead anymore. Do you have the fallback? And it's a unique advantage for IR to have that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you guys so much. This was a great discussion. And Roger, looking forward to seeing what you got coming out and following your story. And Aneesa, thank you again for coming on. There's a lot of great pearls in there, so appreciate it.
Yeah. No, thanks, Aaron, for having us. It's just great
so much.
have this. It's a great episode to have. I wish this episode was here a year ago, so that I could
But then you wouldn't have your YouTube channel.
That's probably
Yeah.
true.
There.
See?
Yeah. It'll be a nice
So
101
things
for
happen.
everybody.
Yeah, things happen for the way they're supposed to happen. Now
Yeah.
you have a
Yeah.
YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at @_BackTable on Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. BackTable is produced and hosted by myself, Aaron Fritts, and co-hosts
Chris Beck.
Sabine Dawn.
Michael Barraza.
and Ali Behetti.
Our audio team lead is Kieran Gannon, with support from
Caleb Hodson.
Josh McWhirter.
And Ness Smith-Savadoff.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz.
Article and transcript support by Taylor Robinson.
And Delaney Aguilar.
Social media and PR by Ann Dang.
Intro and extra music is Ripperoo by Skeptic Moon. Find us on Spotify or at local live music venues in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.